there's been rumors bandied about in the media that you may end up running on a ticket with Donald Trump as his vice president. So what is your response to those rumors, and can you definitively say you will never run on a ticket for the White House with Donald Trump?
Yeah, in my experience, a lot of the stuff that you read in the mainstream news and the corporate news is what I would call conspiracy theories. You're dealing with an entire industry made up of conspiracy theorists. And a direct answer to your question, no, I will not be Donald Trump's vice president.
Good evening, good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, Mr. Robert Kennedy Jr. My name is Gina Felix Goldman. I'm a journalist from Mexico. I went to the San Fernando Valley as a journalist, and I asked everybody, a lot of people, what question would you ask the former president of the United States, which is Donald Trump, and what would you ask the future president of the United States? And I told them that I was going to be here, and a lot of them are not able to be here because the majority in Pacoima, the San Fernando Valley, it's a low-income neighborhood, and they're working, they're cleaning homes, and some of them are even outside in the street working with the jackhammers. And they want to know, when will you be having an opportunity to come and visit Pacoima, the San Fernando Valley, Sun Valley, Granada Hills, and the neighborhood where you really do have hard-working Latinos. There's a large percentage of Mexicans, large percentage of people from El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and when you meet the president of Mexico, what kind of conversation will that take place regarding the border?
So let me answer those questions, and let me actually start by to the previous question, which started out with the previous questioner started out with the observation that this was a kind of, the border is a kind of Trump issue. And what I would say is this should not be a partisan issue. As I said, I don't think it would be if people could see what I saw. I went down to the border feeling that Trump had made a mistake on the wall. But I feel like people need to be able to recalibrate their worldview when they're confronted with evidence. And that we ought to be able to do that in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. And when I'm president, what I'm going to do is bring in Republicans and Democrats and get the best Republican ideas and the best Democratic ideas and put everything on the table. And to avoid the kind of ideological pettiness that has been so damaging to our country. And I think what we're seeing on the border today is the outcome of that, and is the outcome of a lot of it of political pettiness, rather than rather than a comprehensive and thoughtful analysis of what we ought to be doing in respect to promoting the best values of our country and the best outcome for every American and for everybody else. And that's what we ought to be looking at it, and not brand it Republican issue or Democratic issue, but just say, let's deal with this. It's an existential threat to our country, and it's not good for the 16 million illegals who are now living here and cannot legally get a job and cannot defend themselves. It's not good for the working people in this country, in the San Fernando Valley and elsewhere, who are now competing in their wages with people who can be paid $5 and $6 an hour because they don't have the political power to defend themselves, to demand a higher wage. It shouldn't be a Republican issue. It shouldn't be a Democratic issue. There's no such thing as Republican children or Democratic children. We're all American, and we need to. My father spent a lot of time in the San Fernando Valley, and I've been in the San Fernando Valley and in most of the big towns that you mentioned, and I can't wait to go back there. My father told us when we were little, he would take us to places like the Mississippi Delta, and he would take us to Bed-Stuy Restoration, which is one of the poorest neighborhoods in New York, or to Harlem or Southeast Washington, or to Delano to visit Cesar Chavez, or to Eastern Kentucky, Western West Virginia, where the poorest Americans were. And he would always tell us, he would say, the big shots in this country, the big corporations, the big millionaires, they have plenty of people to help them. They have lobbyists, they have attorneys, they have PR firms, and they own the politicians who can protect their interests. And he said, those people don't need the Kennedys. The people who need the Kennedys are the people that you're talking about. Those are our people. And because they don't have the lobbyists in Washington, and they don't have the representation and the power in our political process. So those are the people that I want to represent as president, and I know the desperation. I haven't been recently to the San Fernando Valley, but I've been to a lot of places in this country that look like, and including Eastern Ohio, and Western Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, and Cleveland, Ohio, and many, many other places. And I've seen the desperation that the working people in this country are dealing with. We're living in a country today where 57% of Americans could not put their hands on $1,000 if they have an emergency in their family. We're living in a country where 35% of Americans do not make enough money to meet basic human needs, which is food, transportation, and shelter. The average income in this country for Americans is $5,000 less than the money it takes to survive. So how are people making up for basic necessities, $5,000 less than what is needed for basic necessities? And I've watched people, in Yuma, in the food banks and in the grocery stores, change the recipes for their food so that they can make it through the grocery line. I've seen one of my best friends just lost his food stamps that got cut from $283 a month to $23 a month. And you can't live on that. And he sent me a text last night saying, I'm eating one meal a day. It's the only way I can survive. And there's so many Americans. And how are they funding that gap? That $5,000 gap, they're funding it with credit card bills. They're putting it on their credit cards to survive. And try to imagine a good end to that. They're paying 22% on average in their credit card bills. If the mafia did that to you, it would be called loan sharking. But for the banks, it's just business as usual. And Americans have the highest credit card debt that we've ever had. I think $1.3 trillion now, and $330 billion were added during the Biden and Trump administration, the highest, with the same policies in both administrations, the same economic policies that people are now, both President Trump and President Biden are running based upon those economic policies that have completely failed the middle class in this country. So if they win, we can expect more of the same. But because people are funding their lives on credit card bills now, they have to make tough choices. Americans, including those you're talking about, Families are sitting, in their living rooms at night and listening to a baby cry in the room next door and wondering whether that baby is $100 sick or $300 sick or $500 or $1,500 sick before they bring them to a hospital. And they're choosing between medicine and food. They're choosing between food and gasoline for their car. They're making these terrible, terrible, terrible choices every day, these nightmare choices, which is the opposite of the American dream. They're looking at a gas light or an engine light come on in their car, and it is Armageddon for them. It's the end of the world, because there's no way they can bring that car to a mechanic and get that fixed. And they're living in terror. And, those are the people that I'm going to be representing as president.
Hi, my name is Sue Carpenter. I'm a national digital journalist with Spectrum News based in Los Angeles. And I just wanted to know, what is your stand on the Registry bill, which would potentially give 8 million undocumented immigrants the ability to apply for permanent legal residency if they've been in the country for 7 years?
What I would put that bill on a shelf, because I don't think I don't think it could pass Congress, and I don't think we ought to pass it in Congress until we've sealed the borders. And I think once we've sealed the borders and we've assured Americans that the illegal immigration has stopped, then we can look at an amnesty program. And it's vital that we do that. Something like that for the people who are here in this country as quickly as we can, but we cannot do that realistically. We cannot go to the American people and ask them to do that before we seal the border, and it will never pass until we do that.
Good afternoon, Mr. Kennedy. I'm Tony Coates from Long Island News Radio. How are you?
Very well.
It seems to me the question has to be raised about, qui bono, who benefits in this? It seems that the Republicans raise a lot of money calling the Democrats permissive on the border. The Democrats raise a lot of money calling the Republicans heartless on the border. And what we don't have is any kind of responsible legislation in the hopper in the House or the Senate. So who's benefiting from this, and why is there no action?
Well, I think both parties benefit. And listen, if you really wanted to end the border crisis in a moment, in an instant, the most obvious thing to do would be to prosecute people who hire illegal aliens, or the businesses who do that. If you did that, I'm not saying that this is what we need to do right away, but I'm just pointing to the obvious. Nobody would hire them if people were going to jail for doing that. Put somebody in jail for doing that, and it would end overnight. Why aren't we doing that? Because essentially lots of people benefit. And I think, traditionally the Republican Party donors have been big corporations that benefit from low wages. And so there's a benefit there, and traditionally the Democratic Party has gotten the advantage of new voters, of people who are newly immigrant are much more likely to vote for the Democratic Party. Although if you're an illegal immigrant, you can't vote, but I guess, anyway, there's plenty of reason to point to both parties, and we can point to both parties not only to answer the question, qui bono, but both parties have contributed to the problem. There's also, we didn't, and again, I'm just making an observation, but we had, when Ronald Reagan came into office, we had a million illegal immigrants in this country, and there wasn't a big border crisis. And the reason for that is we had 30% of the workers in this country belonged to labor unions, and the labor unions functioned to keep illegal immigrants from being hired. So if an illegal immigrant showed up at a work site, they didn't have a union card, they were illegal, they would be reported. And there would be a response to that. And the destruction of the union movement in this country, whether you're for it or against it, has, by the time Reagan left office, there were 3 million illegal immigrants in this country. And, that kind of bulwark was withdrawn. And now it's 10% of our labor force is unionized, and those reports never get filed. I'm just talking about the history so that people can have some perspective on this, but both political parties have been instrumental in creating this crisis, and I want to deploy and mobilize both political parties to try to solve it.
Hello, Mr. Kennedy. My name is Dan Nicewonder, independent media from Pasadena, also KPFK FM's Rebel Alliance News. And I'm the grandson of Swiss immigrants. And I know you mentioned that most of the people coming across the border were coming because of money and not because of political asylum. I know my grandparents came here because they wanted a new life here in the United States. That being said, the U.S. Congressional Budget Office's own report that they released last year, from 1989 to 2019, the bottom 50% of the population economically was sharing 2% of the wealth. So we have to deal with these issues, and when there is a Kennedy administration, are we going to see a sequel to the New Deal, new jobs programs, regulating Wall Street, securing Social Security? What do you intend to do once you are president of the United States?
I'm a traditional Kennedy Democrat. I think human dignity, and particularly dignity of the workers, and the American middle class are the foundation stones not only of our economy but American democracy. I grew up in a period in American history that economists call the Great Prosperity. It was a period of approximately 40 to 50 years following World War II, when the American middle class became the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. So at the time that I was a young man, our country owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. And the American middle class was flourishing. We were producing products that everybody in the world wanted. People, when I went abroad, people would do anything to buy Levi jeans that I was wearing. People wanted American cars. In Europe, I traveled a lot with my father and my mother when I was little. And they wanted our electronics, RCA Victrola and radios, and transistor radios, and all these things that we had invented. And we were beloved around the world. People loved the United States of America. When I went in 1964, I went to Poland with my dad. Poland at that point was a communist country. And the communists were, my father went without permission from the government. We got the visa and crossed the border. But the Polish government, communist government, didn't want us there, and they were doing everything to make sure that the state-controlled press did not report our presence in the country. They never did. And in fact, one day we went to take a bunch of presents that we'd brought from the United States to an orphanage in Warsaw, and the government had removed all the orphans by the time we got there. So, and we went to Krakow to meet the cardinal, who everybody knew that he was a saint. He'd been tortured and jailed by the communists, and he's an extremely reverential and pious man, and had been an inspiration. He had inspired a resurgence in the Catholic Church in Poland, and we went to his residence, to the Cathedral of the Black Madonna in Krakow. And we were waiting for him, to meet this guy who everybody knew was going to be beatified as a saint as soon as he died. And we went, actually in the kitchen, this is kind of a side story, but it's interesting. There was a priest who made chicken sandwiches for me and my brothers, my mother and father. He spoke English, and he wanted to talk about skiing and what skiing was like in the United States. And and that priest who he spent the afternoon with before we were given the audience with Krakow later became Pope John Paul II. But when nobody knew we were there, except people saw us when we went in. And when we came out, there were over 1 million people in the plaza outside the cathedral. And they surrounded our car. We were on the embassy vehicle, and my father got us all to crawl out the window. We stood on top of the car. And I was, a 10-year-old, 11-year-old kid at that time. And all I did all afternoon was sign autographs for people. And they shook our car. They sang Sto Lat to us, which means may you live forever. It's kind of a national song, an anthem of Poland. People were crying. This wave of emotion was extraordinary because they loved the United States. We were a moral authority around the world. And all of that was taken out of the growth of the American middle class. And every social scientist will tell you that without a middle class, you cannot have democracy. In nations where there's large disparities of wealth, of great wealth above, and an understory of widespread poverty below, is an economic configuration that's too unstable to support democracy. You need a middle class to have democracy, and we are losing the middle class in this country. And we need, that. I'm running for president because that is going to be the focus of everything I do, to restore the American middle class, the economy, the good health, the end of the war economy, which is draining our country, the closure of these bases and around the world, and bring that money home and rebuild America.
Hello. Hello, Mr. Kennedy. My name's Melissa Tumim. I'm with the Santa Monica Observer. When President Biden recklessly withdrew from Afghanistan, he left behind our allies, women's rights activists, and lots of other people who participated in the development of the country that we fostered. When I was there in 2012, I would ask people, a lot of Americans think we're only here to take Afghanistan's resources, and every single one of them responded to me, look around. All of this is because of America. I love America. We rebuilt Afghanistan and gave them hope, gave them a promising future. That Joe Biden withdrew when he took our minimal forces out of the country and left them to the tyranny of the Taliban. And on top of that, as a volunteer with Freedom Birds, an organization which had obtained airplanes to help evacuate our most vulnerable allies, they couldn't operate because they had no place to land. The Biden administration refused to grant refugee status to Afghans. And it is my understanding that the only people being turned away at the border currently are Afghans. How will you correct that?
How will I correct allowing Afghans into the border?
How will you correct the refusal to give Afghans refugee status because no other country will take them as long as the United States refuses to grant them that status?
First of all, I would disagree with you. I don't disagree with you that our withdrawal from Afghanistan caused tragedy in that country. At that point that we withdrew, we only controlled a very small part of that country inside of Kabul. Most of the provinces of Afghanistan were already controlled by the Taliban. And we had been it's our longest war. It's even longer than Vietnam. We were there for 20 years. In my view, we shouldn't have gone in at the outset. We cannot be the policemen of the world in this country. We cannot run the other countries have to be responsible for their own governments, and we can't. There are many, many bad people in the world. And it's not the job, John Quincy Adams spoke for all the framers of the Constitution when he said, America goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy, because they understood that if we have an imperium abroad, we could not sustain a democracy at home. We would turn into a security state, a garrison state, a surveillance state, and we would lose our democracy. We're borrowing to stay in Afghanistan. We borrowed $6 billion a day from the Chinese and the Japanese. We're weakening our country. And the middle class pays for that through the hidden tax of inflation. We don't have the money. And we can't, we're acting like the alcoholic who's behind on the mortgage payments and is taking the milk money and buying rounds in the bars for strangers. That's how we're acting as a nation. And we need to take care of ourselves here at home. In terms of the question about Afghans being denied at the border, we have a law in this country that says if you are being politically persecuted and you are fleeing political persecution abroad, that you are entitled to stay in the United States of America. That's the law. What I will do as president is I will appoint immediately enough judges so those cases of the Afghans and others can be fairly adjudicated at the border swiftly to let the people who are actually fleeing political persecution into this country as quickly as possible.
We have time for just one more question. And then afterward, we have a really important announcement, so please stay seated.
My name is Alberto Godinez. Mr. Kennedy, it's an honor to be here, and I'm immigrant, proud to be an American.
Thank you.
After today, before I do my question, after today, I will change party and support Kennedy 2024. After 25 years of being working on the media in Los Angeles, I retired because I got tired of the fake media. And I decided to do my own Spanish program, Caiga Quien Caiga. And here's my question to you. Also, I'm proud to be an Scientologist. But my question to you is this. The border seems that it's not a problem. The problem, if we don't stop the problem from Guatemala, Central America, South America, and even from Mexico, if we don't create politicals, if we don't do something right in Mexico and Latin America, people will be crossing. It's not going to be any wall that is going to stop people crossing and coming to the States. Because when there is a need and there's a crime, people will fly no matter what, and nothing will stop them. My questions to you, Mr. Kennedy, you are willing to work with other countries to prevent the people invading United States? That's my questions to you. Are you going to...
Absolutely, and today we have the worst relationships around Latin America that we've had. I mean, in some ways, the neglect that with which we've treated Latin America, particularly Central America in recent years, has probably been helpful because our former policy was so catastrophic. When they were the center of our attention during the 1980s, and we killed millions of people, not in wars, but literally murders, with death squads, government, state-funded death squads of the poorest people in society, priests, nuns, attorneys, professionals, law professors, targeting people, the intelligentsia, targeting the poor, Indians, farm workers, etc. And those were catastrophic. And they're still living with the legacy of those actions. But my uncle and father, one of their top foreign policy priorities was Latin America. That's why they started the Alliance for Progress. That's why they started USAID, to change the relationship that the United States had for decades, for centuries, with Latin America into a partnership. And instead of like people have said, 80 military bases, we need an economic partnership. And we need a partnership that is going to help support the economies in those countries in ways that is not going to punish workers in the United States, and that is not going to cause these waves of immigration of desperate people coming across the border. Oh, I thank you for your question. I think it's really important, and I want to make that pledge to you that will be one of the primary foreign policy priorities of my administration. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kennedy. Today I changed party and I support Kennedy 2024.